It is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Yehudit Seligman. We're here in your beautiful apartment in Jerusalem. And Judith, thank you so much for...
It's for me to thank you. Okay, so I was born in Amsterdam in 1939, October 39. I lived in Amsterdam till we were deported in 1943. First to Westerbork and then to Theresienstadt. I don't remember much about the camp. I was young. I mean, I remember myself sitting playing in the sand somewhere, but that's about all. We were extremely fortunate. We went 5 people and we came back 5 people. It was my parents, my sister and me, and my late grandmother. We all were deported together, more or less together. My grandmother was deported a bit before us, but then we were together, and we came back together, and that's something hard to explain. I mean, that's really...
It's pretty unique.
Very unique. Very unique. I didn't realize all those things at the time, but we went there 5 people, we came back 5 people, which is very unique. That's my grandmother on my father's side who was with us.
I think you have a picture of your grandparents.
That's my grandparents. My grandfather passed away in 1940. He had one of the largest private libraries in Europe. He was known all over Europe. I mean, there's even a story how on Sukkot, my father was sitting in the sukkah with pupils, of course my mother, I was a baby, and the Gestapo came because they wanted to seal my grandfather's library, that nobody should touch it. They later took it. And they told my father to come with them, and my father said yes, but on foot. He wouldn't, it was Sukkot, he wouldn't ride. And so he went with them on foot. They sealed the library. No books should be taken out. They knew about the library. And they sealed the library. And okay, my father later came back to the Sukkah. And that was, I think in 42 maybe, I don't know. And then after the camps, we came back to Holland. My father brought back the Jewish Rosenthaliana library, which is part of the general library, the public library in Amsterdam. There was a Jewish library, Rosenthaliana, that was taken away during the war. And then more or less the same crates came back with the books, and my father put it back into... It's still there today. I visited it. The Rosenthaliana Library, which is part of the public library in Amsterdam, which is huge. The public library there is huge. And in 1950, January 1950, we came to Israel. We came to Jerusalem. Actually, we came because my father was nominated to teach at the Hebrew University. I was almost 10 then. I went to school in Israel. Didn't like the school very much. I won't mention its name. After high school, I went to the army for 2 years. It was interesting. I learned a lot. The army was good for me. And that's it. I have been teaching English mostly privately at home. I have quite a few pupils who are well known in the city later, and that's nice. I did that till about 8 years ago. And now I'm still doing it occasionally at Jackie's. But I liked it, I loved it. I really loved it. I had a lot of nice pupils. I did it here in this room, and it was nice.
And Judith, can I ask, with regard to your parents, did they speak to you a lot about what happened?
Not at all. Not at all. I know very few things. My father sometimes mentioned at Leil HaSeder, he mentioned the Seder he gave in Theresienstadt.
I'm just going to show a picture of your father.
I hope one of the better ones.
I'll show a few. And what was your father's speciality? He was a professor of
Bible.
Of Tanakh.
בחוג למקרא.
Here's in his library. And was he in Hebrew University for many years?
He 1950 till he retired. Unfortunately, he didn't see at the end but he still gave for master students, MA, he gave classes at home.
And the library that your grandfather had, were most of the books saved?
Most of the books, my father had very few books out of that library. There's quite a few of my grandfather's library's books at the National Library in Jerusalem. Quite a few. Gerhard Scholem, later known as Gershom Shalom, he took care of, took care is the wrong word. He, at a certain time, busied himself with collecting books from Europe, which were all over Europe, books which had, of course, been stolen from Jews, plain stolen. And he collected them mainly for the Hebrew University Library. And there were books for my late father's library there. Among all those books where he, it was called Otzrot HaGola. That's how they collected quite a part of the National Library in Jerusalem. They didn't, they had a small library and they didn't have very many books, so.
Judith, this is a very, very special Chanukia.
It is. My father got it for his Brit Milah, and it survived during the war, it survived in the National Library in Amsterdam. They took a couple of pieces for my father, this Chanukia, a Seder plate, which is not a Seder plate, but which is fairly large, and they took it and they put it with their Judaika, which they had in safekeeping in the library.
And they returned it after?
After, of course. No question about it. They returned everything. They just took it for my father. He was known, his father's library was known. They took a few Judaica pieces from him and kept them.
So I'm just going to show, it's the most beautiful.
It's on oil, and it has been used ever since we came back in 1945. My father used it, later my mother used it, and I actually, it has been mine since 1950, because this shamash, which is very small, you can take it out, got lost when we came on Aliyah. The shamash here got lost, and I found it, and then my father said, okay, the Chanukia is yours. And I've been using it since my mother passed away for about 13 years now, on olive oil. And it's very pretty when it burns, when the candles are lit. Only they're not candles, they're wigs which go in.
So you used this before, when you were born, they used it in the
They used it, of course. They took me down every evening when I was about a year for Hanukkah. I was sleeping and they took me to show me the candles. And there is a story that on the 9th day I cried because nobody came to take me down. They took me to see, and apparently one of the first words I said in Dutch was licht. And it's not an easy word to pronounce, but the story is that I don't remember that I said licht, light, as one of my first words.
And you did your grandparents on both sides, were they many generations in Holland?
My grandmother was. My grandfather, here on this picture, my grandfather came to Holland when he was 13 from Germany, from Karlsruhe, and he loved Amsterdam, and he was in Amsterdam ever since, till he passed away in 1940.
And what profession were your grandparents?
My grandmother was a housewife. She had one child, that was my father. And my grandfather, I always asked my mother, okay, now tell me, what did my grandfather do? He was something like a Privatdozent, something. He didn't have a real profession. He had this library. His private library was one of the biggest, largest private libraries in Holland.
And was it mainly Judaica, or was it a general library?
He collected Haggadot, but it was all kind of. It was a general library. He was a book collector. My father had a library, which he used for his work, for his studies, for his private interest. My grandfather was a book collector. He really had this apparently very, very incredible collection of Haggadot. There are quite a few things now in the library here in Jerusalem.
And they have his name?
Not really, no. Some have an ex libris in it. Some. I have a book with his ex libris here. Some do, but many don't. There were codes in the books which my father knew how to decipher. I don't know whether anybody, maybe one of my nephews. The code said where he had bought the book, how much he had paid, but that was in code on the front page. I myself never knew how to decipher those codes.
And what happened to the Haggadot?
They were dispersed all over the world. Probably in libraries in the world there are. I never really followed that up.
Because today they're very valuable.
They are absolutely.
There are many collectors of Haggadot.
Absolutely, and those were, of course,
These were antique.
Antique and important and valuable. I don't know.
And your father, when he was in Amsterdam?
He taught Hebrew and Jewish history at the HBS, which was a high school, Jewish high school. And he taught there. And he gave classes. He was a Rav. He studied at the seminary.
And he had smicha?
He had smicha, yeah. Yeah. He had a smicha. He never really practiced as a Rav, but he had a smicha, yes.
And
my grandfather was a chaver. That's Ben HaChaver Shmuel. Yeah, my grandfather was a chaver, whatever that is.
And Judith, it's very interesting because what you said, that the whole family were deported first to
Westerbork.
And they were late. They were deported.
Late, relatively late in 43, June 43.
Do you know why it was that they were
deported late? I don't know. They were on a special list. I don't know exactly what. And that's probably also why, or how, not why, how the family. We were deported late. We were not deported from Theresienstadt, which actually was more of a transit camp. And we stayed in Theresienstadt till the end, till the Americans and the Russians came. I remember the Americans, they had Hershey chocolate.
And you remember?
I remember that.
When they
came to liberate the camp, they had chocolate.
And your sister, was she older than you?
No, younger, but she passed away 2 years ago. She was younger than I was.
And do you know how long you were in Westerbork for?
A couple of months, I don't know exactly.
So it's also quite interesting that they sent you to Theresienstadt and not to Auschwitz. Or...
No, from Theresienstadt people were sent to Auschwitz. From Westerbork, I think less, I don't know. But people were sent to Theresienstadt, which was a model camp. I mean, it was shown to the world as being so wonderful. Not so very wonderful. My father worked there as a librarian. He catalogued the books which the Germans had taken, among them books of his own father's library. Yes. And that was what they occupied him as. I remember Leo Beck from the camp. Leo Beck. Later we met him in New York. After my mother's family, my mother's parents lived in New York, but only, I mean, they left. I was born in 1939. They came from Germany to Holland to be with my mother when I was born. They left Holland last minute, and they wanted to go to New York because one of their daughters was in New York and had a business and was relatively well off, and she had arranged all the paperwork and they could come to New York, but they weren't let into the United States because the United States at that time did not let in any Jews anymore. So they were around in South America. They settled at a certain point in Quito. They came from Frankfurt. They were relatively well off, and they lived kind of a very, displaced person's life in South America. And then in 1945 they came to New York, and in 1946 my parents, my sister and me, we came to New York to visit them. We stayed there for 6 weeks. And we met all my mother's family. There was a lot of uncles and aunts and whatever. And I was lucky. I got measles at a certain point. So I was left in a room with my toys and my books, and I was left alone. That was in New York. And then we went back to Amsterdam.
And you remember when you had the encounter with your family?
Yes, I remember that.
So you already...
I was 11, 12 at the time. What was it? 46. So I was 11, 12. I remember that. There was snow. It was in winter. I mean, my grandparents lived there in a very small, not very attractive apartment. My Aunt Ruth, who was already then in America, lived in a beautiful apartment, and that's where I was sick, and it was very nice, and only my parents could visit me. I remember my grandmother, of course. My grandfather was very nice. I remember my grandparents in New York. They lived in New York, they passed away in New York. They visited us in Israel in 1956. They came to Israel to visit us.
And Judith, can I ask, when you were in Theresienstadt, okay, so you were very young, it's very hard to remember, but did you stay with your parents? Were you
I know a few things, very few things. There was women and men, they were separated in separate camps. I remember my grandmother was with me. I mean, during the day I was alone. My mother worked. For Pesach, she even worked baking matzot, because this was a camp where everything was so good for the Jews, and it was
They wanted to show to the Red Cross and
how good they were. Not so good, but never mind. And my mother baked matzot for... my father gave a seder there. For 40 people, they all stood in one room. What I remember my father telling very occasionally, hardly ever, on Leil HaSeder. He gave the Seder there, it had to be over at 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock was more or less the time when you could say Kiddush. So what he did there, he started with Hallel, and then towards the end he did the first part of the Seder. He told that occasionally, very rarely, in Jerusalem when he gave Sdarim here at home. The maximum they could seat was 17 people, 17, that was no more. And he occasionally told that. He gave classes in the camps, in Jewish studies, whatever. I once went to a lecture here in Jerusalem by a Dutch professor here in, not far from here in the, anyway, and at the end I went to thank him. I knew he knew my mother. He had been to my mother's place, to the library, and somebody heard my name. I mean, I introduced myself and I thanked him, and somebody who stood in line with me, he said, "Seligman, are you a daughter of Leo Seligman?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Oh, I attended the Seder in Theresienstadt." And I'm stupid me, I didn't follow the man and say, "Give me your telephone number." I never did that, so I never followed it up. It was here at the Academia Lemadaim on Jabotinsky. And I never followed it up, and I'm very sorry.
And Judith, can I ask, from Theresienstadt, do you have any memories of being hungry or
Thank God, no.
You don't have memories of that?
I have memories of my father. There was a place where you could look and see my father standing in line to get food. You know, you had to stand in line to get food. I don't remember being hungry, no. I'm sure people were. I'm sure. No, I don't really remember the food. I don't remember being hungry. Thank God, no.
And do you remember when the liberation with the Americans? You remember
the chocolate, the Hershey, the brown chocolate.
And did you know it was happening with the liberation?
Not really. They gave me chocolate.
And when you travelled back, do you remember the
train ride, which was very, very long, which was, it was a kettle train. Everybody sat on the floor. Oh, I remember one thing, which I almost remember. The train stopped very long everywhere. Then we stopped in Dresden, and it had been known in the camp that Dresden had been completely bombed. And my father was interested. He took me on his shoulders and went to see at least the train station in Dresden. And then the train left immediately, and we ran and we caught another carriage. But I mean, I personally don't remember that. I remember sitting on my father's shoulders, something. We were all very thin, you know. And then the train left immediately, and it didn't stand. He couldn't see very much of Dresden. And that I vaguely remember. I was almost 6.
And when you came to Amsterdam, do you remember?
I remember I remember we were in a home for repatriated people, in a home for a year, and then we came to a rather miserable flat in the new south part of Amsterdam. Was miserable, I mean, very small. My parents, if we hadn't come on Aliyah, they would have, in 1950, moved to another place, I mean.
Did any other relatives survive?
Yes. I have a picture upstairs. I just now thought of it when I can show it to you in a minute, of a cousin of my late father's, a second cousin of mine. She survived. She was the only child of my grandmother's brother. He had 3 sons and a daughter. The whole family came never back. I mean, the family never came back. She survived. She was, in Dutch you call it onderduiken. She went, with a family somewhere in Holland, a non-Jewish family with whom she lived for the duration of the war. And then she came back, but she was the only one of the whole family. That was my father's uncle, his wife, and his 3 sons. They were deported, and they never came back.
And on your mother's side?
On my mother's side, luckily, my grandparents and her 2 sisters went to America at the very end when they could leave Holland, so they survived. My 2 aunts there, my grandparents on my mother's side. So my grandparents survived they left Holland very much last minute. My grandparents on my mother's side, they left in end 39 with their youngest daughter, my Aunt Miri. Their eldest daughter was already settled and she was married and she had a business and they were well off, and they lived in New York during the war. They sent us packages after the war of food and clothing. That was always, packages came to Holland, packages came to Israel. In a way we were very fortunate. We had things, I remember, sometimes we even bartered. I remember for Pesach we got coffee, Severin coffee. There were blue tins and red tins, and I was sent to families who had eggs, because many people around grew chickens. They had eggs, and they got coffee and I got a few eggs for Pesach. That was one of my memories in 1954, 55. We got coffee, they got eggs, everybody was happy. So we got for Pesach, for the cakes, and altogether for Pesach we had a few more eggs than the rations were. At the time when we came to Israel, everything was rationed, obviously.
And when you came back to Amsterdam, it was straight after the war.
Yeah.
Amsterdam must have been very depressed. The mood must have been very somber.
Very low, because non-Jews suffered greatly. Apparently the last winter, the winter of 44, 45, was a very, very bad winter, and people hardly had anything. Non-Jews suffered from the war, the city was occupied, great parts were bombed.
Rotterdam was
flat. Rotterdam was altogether bombed.
And you did in Holland, it has, I think, the highest.
The highest, even higher than Poland. Only it's said, I don't know, but that only 10% came back.
So your family, were the whole family intact?
Is an absolute miracle.
With your
very
grandmother
few.
as well, your grandmother?
My grandmother on my father's side, yes, my grandmother. And she was Dutch, she was born in Holland, and her father was already born in Holland. I don't know where they came from originally.
And when you came back, did you went to school?
I went to school.
Was it a public school?
It was a Jewish school. It was called Rosh Pinah. And I have one memory, not so nice, but I have one memory for my first year at school. I was almost 6 when I went to first grade, and of course I was excited and it was beautiful, and after a couple of weeks they sent me home. And I of course was insulted and very angry. They sent me home because there were a lot of kids older than me who hadn't gone to school, so they had to take those kids in, and me, who wasn't yet 6, they sent me home. And apparently, I don't really remember, but apparently I was kind of a monster that year. I was very angry. And enfant terrible. And the year after I went to second grade, I guess somebody interfered somehow, and I was taken in at second grade. It was a Jewish school. I attended it till the middle of the 5th grade in 1950, January 1950. I left the Dutch school because I came to Jerusalem and went to school here.
And being in the school in Amsterdam, did you make many friends?
I had some friends. I remember I wasn't unhappy. I remember birthday where girls came to my birthday. It was mixed classes, but of course my friends at the age of 10, 11 was mainly, no, before 10, Mapito, 8 or 9, I had mainly girlfriends, and they came to a birthday, and I remember one of the girls whom I liked didn't come. And I went to my father and said, why didn't this girl come? And he said, no, you should always look at those who came and not at those who didn't come. And that's a lesson which I took with me for my life. Try and look at what you have and not what you don't have.
And a lot of the children that you mixed with, most of them didn't have grandparents.
No, when we came to Jerusalem, I had a grandmother, which was outstanding. Look, when we came, at the beginning of the state, it was about 600,000 people. When we came, it was a bit more, but people didn't have grandparents, because the young people who had come to Israel before the war, they came without their grandparents, without their parents. And when we came after the camps, the people who came to Israel after camps didn't have grandparents either. So there were very few. There wasn't, when my late grandmother was the age where she should go to a home or something, there was nothing appropriate in Jerusalem. Nothing. And then later she went out of Jerusalem, and it wasn't very... Now there's many homes, you just have to choose. There wasn't. In 19, she passed away. Wow, I can't recollect at the moment, but when she was old, and she actually should have been in a home. Our house wasn't large enough. She was with us for a time. It didn't work out so well. She should have been comfortable in a home. There were no homes. Nothing. Nowadays you just have to choose. You have to say, no, I don't want to go to a home.
Judith, was it difficult to leave Holland?
No.
Did you have mixed feelings when you left? Or?
No, I was told we were going to a country where it's always sunshine, warm. The first thing we had here, we came in 31st January, and in February was the snow of 1950. That was the first thing we had in Jerusalem. No, I didn't leave with any mixed feelings. We were going to Israel. I was told that was, the best thing a Jew could do.
Do you remember when the state was declared in 48?
Yes, but we were still in Holland, I remember. There was a special get-together of the Jewish people, and my father, of course, had to go there, had to speak there, and he took me and I sat under the table.
And at home, did you speak Dutch?
Dutch.
And when you came to Israel as
we
well?
We spoke Dutch. My grandmother on my father's side was living next to us, and she shared our meals, and she didn't know Hebrew. We spoke Dutch. There was one rule: you can speak either Dutch or Hebrew, but you don't mix. At that time, Jews, especially German Jews in Israel in 1950, they spoke some Hebrew and German together, which was awful, and my father was strict about that. You can speak whichever language you choose, you don't mix.
And when you were still in Holland, in Amsterdam, did your parents associate with many other survivors?
Not necessarily. They associate. My father taught. He was a librarian at the time, which he didn't like very much, but that's what he had to do. It was he had to put up his Jewish library, he had to do that. But he taught classes at home to Jewish young men and women. And they came Friday night. I don't remember. They had few friends. I remember a few families, and they were survivors. I mean, there were hardly any known survivors in Jews in Holland at the time. I remember 2 or 3 families they associated with. A family de Pauw, Flip de Pauw, and he was Dutch and his wife was Ruth de Pauw. His wife was German. It was like my parents. And of German origin she was. And I remember a family Mossel. I remember their daughter and an adopted daughter of theirs. At the time in Holland, I remember a couple of families, they came back, but the brother or the sister hadn't survived, and there were children, so they adopted the children of their relatives. I remember the family Melkman. He was later known here, Josef Michman. He was at Yad Vashem, he was really well known here. And they had adopted children of either their brother or sister, I don't remember, Tzipora. And Tzipora and Avraham, they had a few children of their own and 2 adopted children, or children which they took in of late brothers or sisters of the parents who hadn't survived. So, and I remember another family where that also happened.
And do you remember going to shul in Amsterdam?
Yes, I do.
Back?
I do. Most of the shuls were in Ivris, the Ashkenazi pronunciation, but there was one shul and it was called Sha'ar Yeshuv. Sha'ar Yeshuv was a small, you would call today an overflow minyan, but was a minyan which was in the Sephardi pronunciation, which there were few people who insisted on that. My father and he had friends and they insisted on the Sephardi pronunciation. Most of them later came to Israel. And I remember going to shul, sure.
And were there other children in shul? Or?
There were other children, yes. And there was a lady, a non-Jewish lady, sitting downstairs who took care of the children. And we were, Mrs. Zichenish, she was called, but she was not Jewish, I think, I don't know. And she was sitting there for the children when the children got bored or whatever. And I remember the shul, yes.
And Judith, how is your attitude towards the Dutch? We were brought up in South Africa that the Dutch were amazing and they helped Jews, and
you believe it.
It was very positive. It was
yes, this was in Israel. This was the positive attitude. Now, if you read, I translated it from Dutch into English. If you read the introduction, at Yad Vashem there are volumes for Chasidei Umot HaOlam.
Righteous amongst the nations.
That's right. And the first volume was about the Polish, the second about the Dutch. The introduction there, in that volume, the Dutch volume, gives a very interesting historical introduction. And there, the writer, the author, Josef Michman, explains very clearly that the Dutch were very, very helpful to the Germans. They gave them trains. The postmen knew where Jewish families lived. That I remember from the article. I never read anything about Shoah, but I translated that article from Dutch into English. Because he asked me, I was asked by Yad, I was doing quite a bit of translation at the time, but I never did any translations about the Holocaust. I didn't want to. But Michman asked me, it was a story and I had no choice. So that I learned. Unfortunately, at the time, I wrote everything by hand. I don't have it on the computer. That article is interesting. I asked his son, a couple of years ago, I asked Michman's son, who is a professor and active Yad Vashem, could he please send me a photocopy of that article? but it never happened, so I don't have it. I just remember a few facts. And the Dutch weren't so helpful. I mean, the story which you heard as a person in South Africa, and which we heard here in Jerusalem, that they were so helpful. Some were, some hid. I mean, I have this cousin of mine, she was hidden in a non-Jewish family and she survived. And I can show you the picture later, it's upstairs on the wall. And she survived. There were Dutch who indeed endangered themselves, endangered their lives, endangered their family, and took in Jewish children or Jewish people, yes. But on the whole, the Dutch, let's say, the trains or the postman, they were all very helpful to the Germans.
And the police as well.
And the police as well.
But those that, Chasidei Motalam, the righteous amongst the nations, and I've been very privileged to meet quite a few that were saying,
yeah,
it was something quite extraordinary. What
special. That was special, that's true. But that were private people and not the general...
And the underground also.
Okay, yes. And those people endangered themselves. I mean, yes.
So one has mixed feelings in a way with Holland. Because there were those, the high percentage that did save Jews. And
oh yes, sure. But those were, it was a small, they were very, very special, but it was a very small percentage. I mean, there were Dutch, of course, there was the illegal, the underground and all that, of course, and those people definitely endangered themselves. Some of them were sent to camps, some of them were executed. But that was private. There's a story when the war broke out. I mean, after a couple... My father had a colleague in Amsterdam, de Boer, and he came to my father and he told him that he had places for each of us, for my grandmother, my sister, me, my parents, for each of us places to go in hiding. And he had arranged places where everybody would feel more or less comfortable. But my father decided no, he wanted to stay together. So we never went into hiding. Which, I don't know whether we'd have survived, all of us, because many people... Look, Anne Frank, we all know the story. How did Anne Frank end?
They say there was an informer.
Of course. Yeah. A neighbor or something was an informer, exactly. So the Dutch weren't all that good and that wonderful.
And do you have special feelings when you go back to Holland?
That's interesting. I started traveling very late, much too late. That's one of the few things I regret. My friends already traveled and I could have, we were all short of money, but we managed somehow. Anyway, at the beginning you couldn't take any money out of Israel. So we all managed somehow, and I didn't want to travel. And I started traveling. I started, the first time I went abroad was to England. I was interested, I was teaching English, and I had all kind of places in London which I had to see because they had been in things which I taught. I had to go there. And I went to Holland very late. I don't know, I mean, there may have been some reason behind that. I never went back to Amsterdam till very late. In the later years I went to Amsterdam a couple of times.
And did you have recollections when you were growing up?
Of places, yes.
Did you go to the home that you...
Yes, I went, which was in Nieuw-Zuid, in the new south part of Amsterdam, they changed the name. When I lived there it was Stalinlaan. And they changed the names when I came back and had a look at it. It was Vrijheidlaan, which was... And there was, Churchill still was Churchilllaan, but Stalin was no longer Stalin. We lived Stalinland 45. And I went to look at the place, I didn't go in, of course. My mother She was a very courageous woman. She really was. She had hidden some money in the place where they lived before they were deported. She had hidden some money there. And when we came back, NSBers, that's people who somehow helped the Germans, I don't know whether they were Dutch or German, people who helped the Germans lived in that apartment. And my mother went there and said, I lived here before, I left some money, I have come to take the money out. And they let her take the money out. And it wasn't much money, but it was something. My parents had nothing when they came back. They were, refugees. If the Dutch or if the Jews had so chosen, they could have been in refugee camps still today. We were refugees, but the Jews decided they wanted to live. So they are all over the world now and living. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, not living in camps, living.
That's so true,
We could have been in camps till now. We were refugees. We had nothing. My parents, I don't remember having nothing, but my parents had nothing when they came back.
They had to start over again from scratch.
Over again from scratch. Later it turned out they could, there was some family money which was in banks, but at the beginning they had nothing. They got some recompensation. My father got some little from his father's library. That's how he started his own library. He had nothing when he came back. We were very fortunate. We always were fortunate. We got packages from America. My grandparents were in America. My mother had 2 sisters in America. We got beautiful packages, food packages. I got clothes for my cousins. We had nothing.
And Judith, when did you first really find out what happened in the Shoah?
Look, I always knew, but I never found out because I was never very, very great. And I know people who had friends who had survived and they were interested and they kind of continued living that. I didn't want that. Of course I knew things from home. I knew I had been in camps. I knew that. But I never really followed up.
Did you ever speak about it with your friends?
Never, no. Till, let's say, if you had asked me 5 years ago, I would have said, sorry, Dr. Glassman, not talking about it. Somehow I realized, and there are some, very few of my friends, younger friends, who ask me. I'm very lucky insofar that I have quite a few younger friends. Quite a few, and their children, actually. The lady, Elisheva, who phoned me, she's the mother of 2 boys. One of the boys, the eldest son, is a good Torah reader. He is now almost 18, finished high school. We have done 3 whole circles of Torah reading, and we are now doing the 3rd. He is in yeshiva, so he does it over the phone every Friday. Uzi. And his father occasionally asks me a question here, a question there. Nowadays I answer, but no, I didn't want to. Whereas other people, my parents didn't. I know my sister did more. She spoke about it. She had friends who were survivors.
And at school, did anybody ask you?
No, they called me Para Hollandit, Dutch cow. I weighed less than 30 kilos at the time. It was quite horrible at school. The kids were rude. And, there were Israeli kids. Later I had more understanding for them. When I came, no, and I had no friends. They called me, Para Hollandit. Yeah. And the teachers weren't much better.
They weren't?
No.
In the neighborhood, did you manage to make friends in the neighborhood?
No, we lived in Bet HaKerem. We were pretty isolated. I didn't mind. I didn't have many friends at school either. I apparently am a loner some way. I mean, I'm sociable when I choose to be, but I didn't mind not having friends.
And your parents, did you ask them questions, or did they discuss what happened in the camps? Or?
No.
Did you feel it was a topic you couldn't discuss, or it was uncomfortable?
I didn't want to discuss. Nowadays, when my parents are no longer, I'm sorry, I never asked anything. I didn't. Look, it was a topic not talked about at home. Had I come, let's say, when I was a bit older, 18, 20, 30, to my parents, my mother rather than my father, they would have told me things. My father, if I had asked him, he would have told me things I never asked. Nowadays, I regret it. And you are doing a great thing. I mean, you are collecting the end of the end of the end.
It's true. But with your sister, did you ever discuss with your sister?
No. She was more interested. I mean, she followed up more. She knew people who survived. She helped people who survived later when, elderly people. No, I didn't. I did other things, but I never really socialized with people because they were survivors.
And in Israel, do you have many Dutch friends, or are you associated?
No, I don't have Dutch friends. I'm sorry. It sounds rude to say no. But no, I don't. At home, my late father said we came to Israel to be in Israel and not to. So the Dutch are nowadays there are few of the first generation. They were very much together. They had all kinds of get-togethers and lectures and I don't know what. And my father said I came to Israel to be in Israel and not to be, particularly with Dutch people.
And your parents, were they happy that they made the move? That they
made Aliyah? I think on the whole they were. It wasn't easy, but I think on the whole they were, yes. Definitely positive. Yes. Okay, my father was lucky in so far that he came and he had a job. He came because they wanted him here and he had a job, so very low salary, but the salary came in from the very beginning. And the only condition, later I know people had all kinds of conditions. The only condition my parents made, they wanted a place to stay. I mean, they had been in camps, in places for repatriated people. They wanted a house, not necessarily a house, but a place of their own, a place to stay, where they could grow their daughters, and they could put up a library, and that was how we came to.
And this is the library in your home?
Yeah. I can show you another picture of that library upstairs, because anyway you want to go and...
You can see your father looked very happy. He looked very...
It was unfortunate. He died relatively young, and unfortunate that with this library, the last years of his life he couldn't see. So people had to read to him. And that was unfortunate.
And the library still exists? It
still exists. I haven't been to the house for many years, but it still exists. One of the pictures, he has a look on this.
Right.
Yeah. Here, I think, yeah.
And did you feel a feeling you wanted to go to visit Theresienstadt?
No, I was in Prague. Basically twice initiated. I mean, I wanted to go to Prague the third time. I went there because another place I wanted to go, I couldn't be. Another place in Czechia I wanted to go. And over Shabbat, it looked like a very nice place, but there was a convention there and they were full and I couldn't find a bed, so I went to Prague. And I never went from Prague. There's trips every day, half day, full day. I never went.
Do you think it would have been too painful?
I don't know why. Probably. Maybe I protected myself. I have no idea. I never went. I never want to go.
And Judith, looking back, what message do you give to the future generations? Or
It should be remembered. It should never be forgotten. The Holocaust should never be forgotten. And I don't know how in a few years, Yom HaShoah, there will be no survivors. So, but they have to manage somehow, without survivors, they have to manage to remember. Yizkor. I mean, like we remember on Yom HaAtzmaut, we remember our fallen soldiers who gave us this state. And it should be remembered, of course. How? I don't know, but they should think now how they do it in 5 and 10 and 20 years.
I think you giving your testimony or discussing it, it's so vital, it's so important.
I never did before. I mean, it's thanks to you that I do now. I never did before. Never, ever.
Sure, Judith, I'm so grateful to you. I just want to thank you.
I'm grateful for you. My God, you gave your time to this. Is it over?
Pleasure. No. I just want to come in to thank you.
You thank
so
me.
Judith, I'm so grateful to you. I really am. And there are no
you're
words.
wearing more or less the same shirt.
There really are no words, really. But Judith, you know, to think your family came back intact. Five people that were deported to Westerbork and then to Theresienstadt. And you came back all together. It's a miracle. It is a miracle.
It is absolutely.
And you are a living miracle, and you should just have mazal and bracha and in good health. At Mavis Room to 120. And I'm so grateful to you. There are no words to thank you, Nat.
No, I thank you.
God bless. Really thank you very much.
I mean, you're doing something, it's not just, it's a calling. I mean, it's for you that in 20 years, when there are no more survivors, thanks to these, I mean, they're documents, and they're living documents. They're videos, they're modern.
Yeah.
They go today on YouTube or wherever. And I think that's very, very important.
Well, I cannot thank you enough. Judith, this is such a beautiful picture. Who is the picture?
It's a drawing. I mean, a friend of hers who was an artist, she drew it. I think she's, the lady here is in her 50s maybe. She was a good-looking woman. She resembles my late grandmother, who was her aunt. I mean, she's a daughter of my late grandmother's brother. She was the first cousin of my father. She survived being hidden in Holland with a non-Jewish family.
And what was her name?
Hans Veersheim. Actually, in Holland, my late grandmother, who came on Aliyah, she was buried in Israel, but she had a grave in Holland. And there my father put up a stone 11 months after my grandmother passed away. He went to Holland, he put up a stone with the names of his uncle, his late uncle who died in the war, and his uncle's wife, and their 3 sons who perished in the war. And that is in Holland. I once went to see it. I went with this cousin, Hans. We went to the cemetery there in IJmuiden. IJmuiden, that's very Dutch. That's a Jewish cemetery. And that's where my late grandfather is buried. And on the stone next to him, there is the names of my father's uncle, Hashem Yikom Damam, of 5 of them, parents and 3 sons, who perished in the Holocaust.
And that's their memorial.
That's their memorial, right. And their names are, of course, here in Yad Vashem, with the dates and everything. A good friend of Hans, saw to it that their names are here and everything is done. Yeah. Maybe I should have mentioned that I'm very lucky. I'm one of the very few children, less than 100 children, who survived Theresienstadt. That Ruth Bondi, who is really the authority on Theresienstadt, Ruth Bondi mentions that less than 100 children survived. And I'm one of them. I mean, my story is not as special as people who are older than I am, who remember more. But that's a very special fact, and that's Hashgacha.
And your story is extremely special, and you are very, very, very special.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judith.